In today's screencast, I would like to talk about idioms or best practices in Python. You'll often hear Python developers ask one another how Pythonic a piece of code is. They're simply referring to how idiomatic this piece of code is for solving problems in Python. We can't have a talk about Python idioms without first mentioning The Zen of Python by Tim Peters. This poem can be reached in any recent distribution of Python by simply typing in python-m import this. This poem is meant to be a guiding light or a guiding principle when writing Python code. I would definitely give it a read. Let's launch up the editor and get to some actual programming idioms. As you may notice, at the top of this file we have a shebang statement followed by an encoding type. The shebang statement simply says to look in our environment and find the first Python executable in our path. This is mainly useful for things like virtual envs which may contain third-party applications. The encoding line is simply to tell the user of the script that the encoding of the file is UTF-8. When you don't provide this file, ASCII is assumed. It's better to be explicit, so providing UTF-8 gives you a wider character set and thus providing a more robust script. As you can see here, having one statement per line is the idiom in Python. You are able to do such things as using a semicolon to delimit between multiple statements on one line. This is often considered bad practice. It's best to keep the statements one per line. The next idiom I'd like to discuss is the if statement. So we have a few expressions here that we can use to show and illustrate the example here. So first we'll discuss the poor way of going about it. So we have an expression that evaluates to true or false, and then we run that against the if statement. Now in Python this is a redundant step. We can simply check to see if the value itself is true or false. So as you can see here, let me just comment this out. As you can see here, they both evaluate the same way. This is a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier to write. The next is to illustrate how the false statement would work, and that's simply by putting a not in front of whatever value you want to evaluate to true, so that it prints falsy. And as you can see, that also works. The next expression is the evaluation of none, which is slightly different, and I will get into that in another talk. But to check against none, you simply use the is statement, and that prints none. The next idiom we're going to discuss is lists and concatenating strings. So as you can see here, we have a list of words: cat, dog, horse, human. Now when building strings, you want to add them together. Now this is the poor way of going about it. So you could take a list of words and pass it to the thing and iterate over those words and adding them to a longer word. Now this will work, and as you can see, we have cat, dog all concatenated one together. But the better way of going about this is using the join, which is a built-in in Python. Albeit this is a little bit confusing when you first look at it, but I assure you it's the better and faster way of going about it. Right here we have a string, which is a space, and then we have the join method, and then we have a bunch of words in a list. Now if we were to run this, you'll see that it produces each of the words with a space in between, and that's what this portion of the statement refers to. For example, if we wanted to be spaced by a comma, we'd simply change to whatever that text is in there to a comma, and we'd have comma there. We can put another animal in between each one. For example, we could put a frog in between each one and do it that way, and that would produce cat frog, dog frog, horse frog, and so on. So that is the good way of going. Also much faster and much more performant. We can also pass in lists as arguments as well, and that will produce my name on the screen as well. So if you ever ended up concatenating a bunch of strings, try to shove them in a list and then use the join. Next, we're going to discuss swapping. Now, this here is usually a little bit of a tedious task in other languages, where you have to assign one of the variables to a temp and then assign the other variable to the first one that you assigned a temp, and then assign temp to the variable that you did the first assign on. So for example here, we did something like this. That resulted in Madi being assigned to temp, Tina being assigned to Madi, temp being assigned to Tina. In Python, there's an easier way to do this, and much cleaner and much more precise. We simply use tuple unpacking, and that will result in the same step here. Tuples are denoted, often people think tuples are denoted by the brackets that contain them. So for example, we had dog, cat. The tuple isn't created by the smooth braces, but rather the comma in between the statements. So the statement above goes assign this tuple to that tuple in piecewise order. So assign Tina to Madi and Madi to Tina, and then the result prints the flipped version of the thing. So at first we had 6 9, now we have 9 6. Next thing we're going to talk about is dictionary introspection. Now, oftentimes when you're dealing with dictionaries, you're dealing with third-party tools which return all kinds of information from a particular endpoint. Now, the poor way of going about this is what you do is you look up the name of the key from the dictionary and assign it to his apples, and then we do something a little funky with Jennifer. Since she's not in the initial dictionary, what we do is to make sure that it actually returns a value, we put this in a try catch block, and we check to see if we're able to access Jennifer. If we're not, then we simply assign 0 to her apples, and it ends up with something like this. The better way of going about this is to use the get that is provided in the dictionaries. And what the get does, it simply provides a default value in case that the key ends up with a key error. So we have the dictionary, call get, provide your key, and provide a value that it will return in case there's a key error. And as you can see, this is a much cleaner way of going about it, and much more succinct as to what your default value would be. Next, we have a simple example of not repeating yourself. So here we want to check to see if Madi's at the party, and we're only excited if Madi, John, or Linda are at the party. So, and everybody else we don't particularly care. So as you can see here, this if statement has multiple if statements where we're checking to see if the name is equal to one of the names. Again, this is fully valid, but you can do this in a better way using Python. You can simply assign to people you like to a list and check to see if the name is included in that list. And Madi is in that list, and it prints yay. This is a much cleaner way of going about it, and allows you to quickly on the fly add new names like Linda's there, Lisbon, for example. Again, Lisbon. It's pretty cool and pretty easy way of doing things in Python. And finally, we have for loops. Now, in most other languages, when you're dealing with for loops, you end up doing things like using an index to get you the range. So for example, here we have a list of candies. We get the length of that list, and then we pass that to range. Range will produce a set of numbers between 0 and 4, which will then index to use to access the list of candies. Again, this is a completely valid way of doing this, but in Python you can do a little bit of a better job, and you can use the for each statement in Python. And this simply says for each candy in listed things, print candy. So it means go through each of the items in this list and do something. And in this case, all we're doing is printing. Produce the same result. This is much cleaner and much easier to understand for many reasons. No having to bother with introspection. No need to do this complicated or annoying len nested inside a range. So this ends our idiomatic talk. I hope this was useful to you beginners, and we'll hopefully have a more in-depth idiomatic talk in screencast to come.